even in the port city, this is going to be some sort of power center where, the other institutions, etc., don't apply. So I don't necessarily think concentrating all this power in this commission may not necessarily be the answer. For example, we've seen post 20th Amendment concentration of power and where appointments are again made by one person without the safeguards you had before. But I don't think that necessarily has resulted in those institutions becoming more efficient or in the administration as a whole becoming more efficient. So sometimes democratization and transparency, it may seem cumbersome, but I think in the long run, it has more benefits. But having said that, that's not in any way to say that I feel that our regulatory authorities are super efficient and that they don't need reform. By all means, if they need reform, let's reform them, but not at the expense of or at the risk of sacrificing something here.
Yeah, and also I think they have all the resource, all the power to do that because they have a parliament with 2/3 majority, and they have Vietnamese professionals if they want to contribute and sort of create drastic changes, drastic reforms. So that is another thing. I mean, under this constitution, not very often that you get a government with the 2/3 majority. Lahiri, would you like to
but development must happen within certain parameters. Development should not happen in the extent of sacrificing the sovereignty of the country. At the end of the day, what one must understand that we as Sri Lanka, we have an identity, and our foreign relations, our foreign links should be established within by whilst maintaining this identity. So the one of the main threats that this port city bill addresses is to what extent does it sacrifice our sovereignty and the involvement of the Chinese in this. Now, see, Supreme Court, when this bill is tabled in Supreme Court, what they will look at it from a legal point of view. But as politicians and people sitting in Parliament has the responsibility to vet this bill from a more, I would say, from a more political perspective, from a more business perspective, from a more economic perspective, how it will impact the country as a whole, which the Supreme Court will not give their determination around. So I think what we see is that politicians firefighting over this particular bill instead of understanding the whole impact that this will have in the country in the long run. Now, it's not a case of whether this particular regime is going to be, with particular president is going to be in power for the next whatever number of years, but there will be people who will come thereafter, and this bill will be applicable. So concentrating enormous, one of the key factors is concentrating enormous number of power in this particular figure called the president, and he having absolute discretion with excessive powers is quite detrimental, because in this bill we see that there is no checks and balances, and the president having enormous control in terms of having the ability to appoint people for the commission, including foreigners. So this very particular president today might be in existence. In about another 10 to 15 years, it can be another president. He can bring in whoever he wants. So how does it impact the country? So technically what I see is this commission should have had standing members. Let's say, for example, at least the central bank governor, a representative of the Ministry of Finance, a representative of the UDA, then like key figures should have been made mandatory, so that they are part of this particular commission, because part of this particular commission in making decisions. That is one of the key factors, and also the importance of having links with the parliament. The law-making authority we know is the parliament. So to what extent does the bills that are passed, the regulations that are passed between the port city, to what extent can the parliament get involved? Have they, the law-making authority, is it completely vested with the commission in terms of like issuing rules, codes, directives, guidelines? It was stated that it can be done by the commission without parliamentary approval, which is a serious concern. And also, if you take one of the key factors is that it is exempted from Schedule 2, I believe, exempts from certain key acts like the offshore companies that are established within the port city. They don't have the bearing of the Companies Act or neither the Banking Act. So then offshore companies, they can they operate at their discretion, so they are not bound by the regulations that are stipulated in the Companies Act. How detrimental it is. Now, if this particular port city is a revenue center for the country, then exempting it from the Inland Revenue Act, then exempting it from the Exchange Control Act, how are they going to ensure that the particular revenue that comes from the port city is derived back into the country? Now, these are factors which we need to see from a more economic perspective. And also, you spoke of the whole fact of money laundering, corruption. So when it is exempted from these particular acts like Foreign Exchange Act, Banking Act, you give enormous autonomy to these offshore companies that are established within the port city. So they are away from, and also the whole jurisdiction. Suren, you can correct me here. The powers that are given to, I think, arbitration is made mandatory in terms of all disputes in that arise within the port city. So in such an event, they are exempted from jurisdiction from the local courts. And the arbitrary tribunal is also, I believe, the commission has certain authority in appointing. There also, you can correct me if I'm wrong there. So this is you must ensure that it is exempted from the Sri Lankan standards, which in the end becomes very detrimental. And one of the apart from this, one of the key issues I see is that we don't have post judicial enactment reviews in Sri Lanka. Now, once this particular bill goes to Parliament and after the amendments, does it come back for us for a debate? It doesn't happen in Sri Lanka. So then, how does the common public get involved in this? Is one of the concerns also. Suren, you like to add a bit in terms of post judicial enactment review?
Yeah. So if you're talking about problems with the, sorry, I didn't catch you properly. Were you talking about problems with this particular bill after
Yeah,
it's enacted,
after
or with
it's enacted.
regulations after it's enacted?
The bill after it's enacted, say now it goes to once it's passed, it goes to committee stages for amendments, and then once it's come back, there is no authority for it to be reviewed again, right?
Yes. So basically, you have to challenge the bill after it's placed on the order paper,
Yeah.
and before it becomes law. And then the Supreme Court has given its determination. So now the Attorney General is expected to advise Parliament on how those changes can be incorporated. The court has very clearly set out how the amendments should be made if it is not to require two-thirds and or a referendum. And the Attorney General will have to advise. But thereafter, once the bill is passed, of course, since we don't have post-enactment judicial review of legislation, the court won't be able to test or to determine whether the bill is constitutional again.
Yeah. So that is a serious flaw I think we have in the Sri Lankan legal system. So once it is passed, so I think we saw this in the 20th amendment also. Once it goes to the committee stages, once the amendments are proposed, it doesn't come back. So it's a serious flaw in the law in Sri Lanka. So so this is more like, rather than legislate, it becomes at the end of the day more or less a political document sort of thing. So it doesn't come back to the public to challenge it again. So there is a adverse side to it also. So looking at it from a development point of view is what are the factors that I suggested. So this enormous power concentrated within this particular individual called the president is quite detrimental. So we see with the 20th amendment, the president also having enormous power. So where his large amount of power is concentrated with him, and also with this port city, we see the same thing happening. So it directly challenges the whole concepts of accountability, transparency. It leads to abuse of power, corruption, and main other activities. So I think parliamentarians sitting in parliament must look at this bill in the long run, how it will affect the country. It's not whether this particular presidency sits in power or exercises its authority, if it's in the coming generations, how it will impact Sri Lanka per se is what we need to consider. And I think that is what mainly we also need to question these parliamentarians on when voting for this bill. Are you going to sacrifice the future and the sovereignty of this country towards your inclination towards your political party? Is what we need to question from a layman point of view, I would say.
Yeah, and I think one major issue that I see, I mean, that goes beyond the Port City bill. The current government has a serious mistrust with the functioning of Parliament, even with regard to the 20th Amendment. We saw the government sought to disempower Parliament to a great degree, and Lihinia and I were petitioners, and Suren was one of the lawyers appeared in court over this. Like, the government wants to disempower Parliament, even it is Port City thing. We can see that the government has a serious issue with the oversight functioning of Parliament. They want to avoid that at all costs. Even with the COVID-19 problem, they are disempowering Parliament, and they are creating all kinds of parallel bodies outside Parliament, outside the oversight of Parliament, outside the functioning of Parliament, to tackle this problem. So what is this? What is this mistrust with Parliament? That is a fundamental question that I have. I'll start with Suren. Suren, what is this problem? Why are they so afraid of Parliament, given that they have two-thirds majority and they have a very strong control over their party mechanism? So what is this problem? Why are they running away from the Parliament's oversight functions?
So perhaps although you think that they have strong control and two-thirds majority, they don't see it so. So, well, that's not a question that I can answer as to why they have that particular fear. But also it goes back to what I said about the 20th Amendment, that, I mean, if you look at this, many of the parliamentarians who are now in government were in opposition or in government when 19th Amendment was passed. So sometimes you feel if you are in opposition, it's good to have all these safeguards. But when you wield power, perhaps you feel that you'd rather have the power which is unchecked. But that's a very short-term way of looking at things. But if you look at this, as you correctly said, they did try to remove much of the oversight Parliament had when seeking to enact the Port City Bill. For example, there was a stray clause in the bill which said that the Commission could impose and collect taxes, so not merely rates. But in our constitution, as in most republican democracies, you recognize the fact that because Parliament is like the representatives of the people, Parliament must sanction collection of taxes. And this goes back to the time of, the king wanting to spend money for wars, and the Commons say, no, you can't do that unless we approve it. So it goes back to those times. But that concept is now widely accepted. So the Supreme Court said, no, the Commission can't authorize the collection of taxes. It is only rates and such like it can do, so that has to be changed. Then similarly, like going back to the point that you were making about oversight, there were sweeping powers sought to be given to this commission to decide which exemptions out of those in the second schedule would be given to who. But the guidelines are not specified in the bill. So I can look and say, look, I don't like Rafika, that's investor, even though he's doing $100 million, I'm not going to give him a tax break. But Lihini is very nice, so even though she's bringing only 50 million, I'm going to give you. There are no guidelines. So the court said, no, that won't do. You need to have guidelines. And because it relates to something so important, it can't be just guidelines that you come up with. These guidelines must be approved by Parliament. So you're taking control back to Parliament. And once Parliament approves the guidelines, you can administer. So the oversight of Parliament was brought in again. Then again, there was wide powers to make regulations for matters within the Port City area, including some regulations which would have penal consequences like the imposition of fines and also particular conduct. So the court said, no, that also can't be done, because those are not powers those are legislative powers, those are not powers which Commission can exercise. So as you pointed out, there seems to be some sort of either a suspicion of parliament, or the fact that no, they want to have this parallel institution which is outside the purview, the supervision of parliament. It functions on its own and can be directly controlled, or perhaps a mix of both. Not only outside the scope of parliament, as I said before, even the auditor general's microscope, it won't fall under. So perhaps it's a mix of both even.
Yeah, Lihini, I want to ask you the question which Suren sort of avoided answering, and I want to add something to that also. Now, in this current parliament, we have among the 225 MPs, we have 26 parliamentarians who voted in favor of the 17th Amendment to the Constitution, the 18th Amendment to the Constitution, and 19th Amendment to the Constitution. That means 17th overturned 18, and the 18th Amendment overturned 19. Sorry, 18th overturned 17th, and 19th overturned 18th. So, I mean, a single person, a human being, normal human being can't support all three. And out of 26, 24 MPs voted in favor of the 20th Amendment also. That overturned the 19th Amendment to the Constitution, right? So that is the status of our parliament. So going back to my question, the political aspect of that question, why is this government so afraid of the oversight of parliament? Why are they trying every trick in the book to avoid that? It was very evident in the 20th Amendment issue. It was very evident in the COVID-19 eradication issue. Now it is very evident in the Port City bill also. They are trying to deviate from that oversight function. What are they afraid of?
See, I would say, like, once you're in parliament, they versus a moral standing, they take a political standing. So it's just that when you're in government, it's the government's ruling, the government policies, what they consider. So it is actually questionable if you look at it from a common man's point of view. How can people change your policies overnight? Because it's for one person to be in favor of the 19th Amendment, and then to turn it around, you vote for the 20th Amendment. So these are serious questions if you question the parliamentarians. But what I see is now, if you take a democracy, it's important that we maintain checks and balances between these three organizations: the judiciary, the executive, and the legislature. But but in Sri Lanka, the present president's inclination has been towards centralizing power within himself. Maybe the whole concept of democracy, the ability of parliament being having that checks and balances, that authority is not something I would say this particular present president favors. So he'd rather we should downplay the power of the parliament and have it all concentrated within him. So we saw with the 20th Amendment how the commissions were made dysfunctional, how the Constitutional Council was transformed into a parliamentary council in terms of appointing audit commissions, judicial commissions, or judiciary. All those authorities were being vested with this single person called the president. Though there are parliamentary councils, it's just rather nominal. So I think it is more rather, I would say, political, and the thinking of the president. Probably if somebody else sitting in that chair, a president who respects democracy, respects rule of law, governance, checks and balances, who wants a healthy democracy to run Sri Lanka within that principle, probably would look at it within a different sense. But this particular president might be thinking, having enormous amount of power, having that supreme authority is the way to govern. So, but what we fail to understand is legislature is created not to suit a particular person or a particular regime, but it is created for the country, for the benefit of the country. And Sri Lanka being Asia's longest standing democracy, we have maintained that democratic identity. So it is the duty of the president, whoever who sits in power, manages this country in that framework. Even also, if you take our foreign relations, like our inclination towards China now is rather alarming. I mean, even this Port City, some of the things I've seen in the media, how the banners in the Port City are just name boards are being Sinhala, then Chinese, then English. So where is the position that is given to the two languages that is mentioned in the Constitution? It is sheer violation. Who is questioning this thing? Now, I think we have Sri Lanka has become like a death haven, and we are at the mercy of China. So, and we question? Do the parliamentarians who sit in Parliament question these things? Who is actually worried about losing the sovereignty and identity of Sri Lanka? I'd like to ask, is the parliamentarian sitting there, even their duty towards protecting Sri Lanka? But it doesn't come to that. It's more or less like, I'm in power, my party, my politics. How do I sustain? I'm in this short stand. Why I get the best maximum for me, myself, my family, as we always discuss. So it all boils down to that. I think Sri Lanka, I think, is in a very, very sad situation, because this is not something which any of us envisaged, and I don't think we would want a country of this nature for our children or future generations. But sadly, it has come to it, and there is nothing much the democratic loving people who talk about it can do, because the power is concentrated between all those 225 who's there. So it's come to that, sadly.
Yeah, I've added Dinidu. I've added Dinidu and Jagan as speakers. Jagan will ask Dinidu to ask his question first, and then I'll move on to Jagan. Dinidu, what do you want to ask?
Thanks, Rasika. So my question is actually like, given that this would have been the first genuine chance that Sri Lanka would have had for creating something that would closely resemble a free port, and considering the SJB's historic roots towards the freer market, and considering the attractiveness that international entities would have towards a robust arbitration mechanism as compared to the lumbering judicial processes that we have in the country, wouldn't have working with the government to create the legislative structure for ports, it would been a better option, because as the public, we didn't see the SJB even offering alternate proposals.
Yeah, I take your point there, because with the politics we see is all about criticism. It's not about collective working. Yes, because now had SJB been in power right now, would this particular legislature be of this nature? I was listening to Dr. Harsha saying that when back then they were in power, the legislature that was drafted in consultation with Mahinda Rajapaksa was a different piece of legislature to what is actually being presented right now. So the policies have taken a complete overturn. So technically, even if the SJB wants to sort of contribute, that also has to come from this particular president as well, because it has to be they